Imagine you have survived hell. You have endured hunger, torture, and industrialized mass murder. The war is over. The gates of the concentration camps stand open. You are free. But what comes next? Where do you go when your home is nothing but a bitter memory and the world seems to have turned its back on you? This is precisely the story of hundreds of thousands of Jewish Holocaust survivors in 1945. Liberation was not the end of their suffering, but the beginning of a new, grueling struggle, the struggle for a future. After the liberation, an estimated 250,000 to 300,000 Jewish survivors wandered through the ruins of Europe. Officially, they were called Displaced Persons, or DPs for short. A cold, bureaucratic term for people who had lost everything. They were homeless, without families, often the sole survivors of entire extended families. Many were physically at their limit, emaciated from years of forced labor and starvation. But the invisible wounds were often even deeper. The psychological burden, the trauma of what they had experienced, was unimaginable. The joy of liberation quickly gave way to a paralyzing emptiness. The world celebrated peace, but for them, it felt as if they had landed on a foreign planet where their old world had been irrevocably erased. For most Jewish survivors, returning to their home countries was unthinkable. Go back to Poland, Hungary, or Lithuania. To the towns and villages where their neighbors had betrayed them, stolen their property, and handed over their families. The idea was absurd and dangerous. Antisemitism had not disappeared with the end of the Nazi regime. On the contrary, it continued to smolder in many places. A terrible example is the Kielce pogrom in Poland in July 1946, where a mob murdered more than 40 Holocaust survivors. The message was clear. You are no longer welcome here. Home had become a trap. Europe, the continent where their ancestors had lived for centuries, felt like one vast cemetery. So they ended up stranded in camps for displaced persons, set up by the Allies in Germany, Austria, and Italy, often in former military barracks or even in liberated concentration camps like Bergen-Belsen. Life there was a state of limbo. On the one hand, there was finally safety and medical care from organizations like the UNRWA and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. On the other hand, there was overcrowding, scarcity, and a grueling lack of prospects. The people waited. They waited for news of missing relatives, for visas to the USA, Canada, or Australia. But the gates of the world remained closed to most. The waiting lists were long, the immigration quotas low. Thus, the DP camps became a ghetto after the ghetto, a place of endurance where time seemed to stand still. The Allies were overwhelmed by the sheer number of DPs. General Patton initially referred to the Jewish survivors with contempt and showed little understanding of their unique situation. They were often housed together with non-Jewish DPs, including former Nazi collaborators. It was only after the shocking Harrison Report, which condemned the catastrophic conditions in the camps, that American policies slowly began to change. Separate Jewish camps were established, allowing for a certain degree of autonomy. But the fundamental problem remained. Where were these people supposed to go? The international community hesitated. The Evian Conference of 1938, where almost all countries had refused to accept Jewish refugees, cast its long shadow over the post-war era as well. The world watched, but barely acted. In this vacuum of waiting and hopelessness, an old idea reawakened with new, unimagined power: Zionism. The idea of a separate Jewish state in Palestine, the historical homeland of the Jewish people, was not new. But after the Holocaust, it took on an existential urgency. Activists and emissaries from Palestine, such as members of the British Army's Jewish Brigade, came to the DP camps. They brought not only material aid, but, above all, a vision. They spoke of a place where Jews would never again be victims, where they could take their destiny into their own hands. They founded schools where Hebrew was taught, organized cultural events, and created an atmosphere of new beginnings. The slogan, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live, became a powerful rallying cry. Zionism offered an answer to the question, where to? To Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Sant. The path there, however, was anything but easy. Palestine was under a British mandate, and the British drastically restricted Jewish immigration to avoid angering the Arab population. In response, the Jewish underground, the Haganah, organized the Aliyah Bet, the illegal immigration. Thousands of survivors embarked on a perilous journey. In overcrowded, unseaworthy ships, they tried to cross the Mediterranean to break the British blockade. The most famous of these ships was the Exodus 1947. On board were over 4,500 Holocaust survivors who were intercepted by the Royal Navy and brutally sent back to Germany. The images of the Exodus traveled around the world and became a symbol of the survivors' plight and British intransigence. The pressure on the international community grew immensely. The experience of the Exodus and the untenable situation in the DP camps made it clear that only a radical solution could resolve Europe's Jewish question. The Holocaust had proven in the most horrific way imaginable that without their own state, their own army, and their own government, Jews were defenseless. The Jewish state was no longer just an old dream. It was a necessity, a guarantee of survival. It was the direct answer to the gas chambers of Auschwitz and the mass graves of Treblinka. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations finally voted for the partition plan for Palestine, which provided for the creation of a Jewish and an Arab state. For the people in the DP camps, this was the moment they had waited for years. There was finally a light at the end of the tunnel, the prospect of a life in dignity and self-determination. The founding of the State of Israel in May 1948 was, for them, the ultimate confirmation that Hitler had not won. I hope this journey into a time that is often forgotten, the time after the liberation, has given you food for thought. If you liked this video and want to learn more about the complex and often overlooked chapters of history, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Stay curious.